Well, I thought it'd be worth doing a clip on how I became a flower farmer. I'm very inspired by my friend Jane Lindsey at Snapdragon Life, and she made a clip recently about how she became a textile artist and developed the business that she has now up in her studio in Loch Lomond, and I really recommend you go and have a look. So I thought, yeah, good idea. I'll do a piece about how I became a flower farmer for all of you. And it might be interesting, not because you want to necessarily be a flower farmer, but sometimes people are looking for ways to find a path through life. And I don't think my path is particularly unusual or groundbreaking, but no two people have the same path. And so it's sometimes helpful to say, I did it this way, and you might go, oh, okay, that's a thought. I hadn't thought about that. So come along, and I'm going to introduce you to the journey I have taken in order to become a flower farmer. And it starts, of course, with books. And if you're new to the channel, you're very welcome. Please do subscribe, press the bell icon, and we'll tell you when we've got more clips coming up. And if any of the tips and tricks I give you along the way are useful, you can always buy me a coffee, or better still, join my club. The links to coffee buying and club membership are in the blurb to all my clips. Right, on we go. Well, maybe my journey to be a flower farmer goes further back than books, but the tipping point perhaps was caused by books. I was a writer and wasn't making any money. And as a single person, I was quite good at living on other people's expense accounts and on a relative shoestring. If you're a young person, you can live on broccoli and not much else, and then earn very little money as a writer. So that's how I had functioned until I met my husband Fabrizio. We ended up here in this beautiful spot in Somerset. We put everything we had into this farm. It's a 7-acre patch, and we were fantasists. We thought we would be market gardeners. We had all the old John Seymour books, which were written in the 70s and inspired a whole lot of self-sufficiency. And we loved all of that idea. We were very into that. But I had yet to learn to be a little bit strategic, and I was very bad with money because I'd never had to be. I had lived literally on air as a single person until my mid-30s. And so I could afford to write books and not make very much money. Then I found I had small children and a mortgage, and I needed an income. Tea cake. So you might think I would just get a job like a normal person, but I had grown up. I am the child of people who've always worked for themselves. My mother made patchwork quilts for a living when I was a child, and still is quilting now. Any of you who've watched my mum's quilting clips, she's still quilting. My dad, computer software design in Cambridge, England, in the 70s, started his own business, has always worked for himself. So working for myself was normal. I haven't worked for anybody else since I was about 27, and I'm 57 on Sunday. So 30 years of not working for other people. I used to think I'm not a team player. Well, no, I don't think I am. I can't be maybe a team player. So one of the ways that, you end up being what you are, your career, is often, very much driven by your character. And I'm not very good at doing what other people tell me to do. Good to be honest about these things. Anyway, I had been writing books, but wasn't making enough money, and I needed to make a living. I had 2 very, very small children, and I was living in rural Somerset. I had no useful qualifications and didn't really know what I wanted to do. Oh, this clipper never works. So as a child, I had determined to be an actor because I had had some success in a play called Hasibu at the age of 7. So 50 years ago, in a marquee behind St Colette's School in Cambridge, I had the peak of my career, according to my father, who still says, you peaked when you were 7. So I was much praised for my performance in Hasibu and became adept at declaring and declaiming poetry and very keen on theatre. So I used to win prizes at the Speech and Drama Festival in Cambridge. And as a child, I was really I thought acting was the way forward. But I lived in a house with a big garden, and my mother was a very keen gardener, but we were not the sorts of people who sat and looked at the garden. From a very early age, I understood that the garden, in order to enjoy the garden, one had to engage with it. It was an activity. And my mother paid me to weed by the yard. So 10p a yard. This is a very long time ago. We had pence. We did have pence, but we were still dealing in yards. So I was paid to weed 10p a yard, and I can still spot a groundsel seedling at about 50 paces. So I understood that there could be an economic relationship between me and the garden. But I'm not my mother. I'm quite like my mother, but I'm not my mother. My mother loves a garden which is purely beautiful. It is as fiddly an activity as you can possibly imagine. Her garden is 3/4 of an acre. Do look at the clips about her garden. It's a paradise and takes so much work. I don't have the patience. Plus, I also need to make a living. So my garden takes much less work, much more ruthless, blocks of this or that or the other thing. But anyway, there we are. I'm here at Common Farm, aged 42, with 2 very small children, and I need to make a living. We moved here with the idea that we would be market gardeners, so we immediately made a vegetable patch about the size of a tennis court. You know, we were ambitious. But we also had pigs and chickens and sheep, all sorts, we were really going full John Seymour self-sufficiency. I very quickly discovered I don't like looking after livestock. The chickens were either eaten by the fox or a friend's dog, or I was constantly treating them for spider mite. Very hard work, chickens. Nice, but hard work. I may go back to having them one day, but I will never have pigs or sheep again. No. And then one day, as my writing career foundered, because this was at the beginning of social media, and if you were out of sight, you were very much out of mind. And I had been in London where I would see people who would say, oh, you're a writer. Oh, yes, you're the unsuccessful novelist. Well, will you write the content for my catalogue? Or will you help develop television programmes? Or will you ghostwrite a piece about the book that goes with this television programme? Or will you... I did a travel book for Think Publishing. I mean, I did lots of books. I published 10 books in my time, but never really made any money out of it. And if you're not, in those days, if you weren't in front of people, they didn't think of you for these jobs. So I was really struggling. And then somebody sent me a bunch of flowers in the post. And I thought, oh, I can do that. I can grow bunches of flowers. And because I'm a sort of mean person who always likes to look a gift horse in the mouth, I actually looked up online to see how much that bunch of flowers cost. And I was very impressed. And I thought, well, I too could grow a bunch of flowers. And so my journey growing flowers for sale, honesty, sweet peas, began. We had a frost last night. It's the end of April, so I covered everything up. Now, being a bit of a Pollyanna, I thought I'll start growing flowers for sale and they'll kind of sell themselves. I strategized nothing. I made no business plan. I threw myself into my venture, assuming that all would be well. And so for the first few years, we carried on living on broccoli. I call them the no babysitter years. They were the years when I learned on the job how to be a flower farmer. It wasn't at the time, there weren't books like Lenny Larkin's book that's just come out about how to make a profit as a flower farmer. My book, The Flower Farmer's Year, was years away. And I have this morning written the end of the entire rewrite of the book. So hold your breath, it's coming out spring 2025. So I had to learn an enormous amount on the job. But slowly, I became a flower farmer. Slowly, I became a flower farmer. And over the years, I became better at it, more adept. I kind of developed a process which I could then teach other people. And I don't teach people that you must do X, Y, or Z. What I do is teach people to think, to identify their objectives and how they can achieve them. I give them all sorts of options to look at and help them come to an objective which will suit them. There are so many different kinds of flower farmers. I grow mostly for bespoke orders. While I do wholesale, it's a very, very high-end bespoke situation with really good quality luxury wedding florists. Do have a look at my chat with Caroline Redpath of Fleur Provocateur to find out more about how the relationship between me and the luxury wedding florist works. I've done my time at the high end of luxury wedding flowers, so I appreciate very much the work that goes into that, and I've chosen to step back. So I do what I call affordable wedding flowers, which is more a buckets and posies setup. So I do a lot of those through the year. I do a lot of work with people like Caroline. I have private clients whose houses I keep filled with flowers. That's a lovely gig if you can get it. I have really strong relationships with my clients. And over 15 years, I've built this business. But I'm still performing. The 7-year-old having a success at Hasibu never became an actor. But the skills I learned when I was standing up in front of people, I learned to breathe properly, I learned to project, I learned to speak slowly so that people at the back can catch up. And then over the years, I have learned to trust that so long as I know my subject, I can impart effectively good quality information which will help other people achieve their goals. And so my business has gone from just flower farming to one where I help other people I educate other people to achieve their objectives. Not finished yet. Just a final note on the subject of performing. I carried on doing theatre, masses and masses of theatre, as much as I could, all the way through school until I left university. And actually I went to the what is now the Polytechnic, University of West of England. It was Bristol Polytechnic, where I read humanities. And I came across a subject called anthropology. And I have found that the most useful subject throughout my career ever since, because, sorry about the wind, it taught me to be interested in how people work in groups and to look for patterns and behaviours which keep people together. This has helped me teach, which has become a really big part of my business. Helping other people achieve their dreams has become a major part. And being able to see, as people walk into my studio, how they behave together. People walk in wearing uniforms. They don't think so. They think, I'm getting dressed, I'm going. But actually, everything we wear tells us a huge amount about each other. The way that we sit, the way that we behave, the way that we speak. And by being able to look at that, it makes it possible for me to bring people into a conversation, because I can see that they're not on the defensive, they're nervous. They're not angry. They're afraid. They're uncertain. And so they rely on their background to give them strength. So anthropology has been incredibly helpful. It's helped me to sell my flowers. It's helped me build relationships with my customers. So everything you do in life gives you skills that you can use, whatever business. At no point during my college days did I think I might be using any of this information to be a flower farmer. But I do. And, I examine my life all the time and I find where my skills are and I apply them because they're there. And you too have all of these things. You may not have done anthropology, you will have done another subject which will serve you very well. Over the years, through your life, you will have learned skills which will serve you very well, be transferable skills. So flower farming, yes, it helps if you know how to sow seeds, weed the ground, that you understand that there can be a financial relationship between gardening and life. But all the other skills that you learn along the way are helpful and can be applied, all of them. So I'm not a brilliant performer, and I know that there are much, much better horticulturalists out there, much better florists. But all those years of performing have made me very good at communicating. And I have to say, I think in life, false modesty is foolish. So think about what you are good at. You might not want to be a flower farmer. You might have some dream that you really want to achieve. So look at what you have now that you already have, which will help you achieve your dream. And be honest about it. Are you a good communicator? If you're a good communicator, it seems a shame to drop that skill altogether, grow flowers in a field in the middle of nowhere and sell the whole lot wholesale and never speak to anybody. I would posit that if you're a very good communicator, that makes you feel good if you're good at communicating. And without it, you'll feel like there'll be a little something missing. So you are allowed to communicate whatever you're good at. You're allowed to teach it. It'll be good. It'll be helpful. Somebody will benefit from it. Anyway, that's the performing thing. So I have no dreams now of leaping about on the stage, but I'm not going to ignore the fact that I can speak slowly and clearly, that Mrs. Blythe taught me to finish my words and use my consonants so that you can hear, even when I'm not wearing a microphone. And that's a skill, and I'm not going to ignore it. Anyway, I'm still flower farming. I'm going to cut some blossom for my orders. You might notice that some of the material I'm cutting today is very, very garish colours. And my club members and I, here on YouTube I have a club, and the clubbers and I have a weekly chat during term time when we talk about different subjects which the clubbers suggest. And today's subject is working with colour, and I really love clashing difficult colours. I much prefer the challenge of working with uncomfortable colours. And as a florist, I'm often asked, for weddings, for example, people don't want clashing colours. They want pale pink and white, or white and pale blue, or yellow and white. And so my challenge as a flower grower, there are two things I have to do. I have to, one, give my client flowers that absolutely blow their mind. So they go, oh, they're the most beautiful thing. But I also have to keep myself interested. If you're going to be a flower farmer, flower farming, like any job, is repetitive and eventually can become quite boring. So you've got to keep yourself interested. And one of the ways I keep myself interested is by working with challenging colours. So, look, dark red leaf crabapple blossom. Oh, I love this. Love it. To go with some of those tulips that I've cut this morning I'm cutting for various orders. I cut to order. I don't just opportunistically cut. Other people have different kinds of business. Other people might have, do gate sales, and they just cut the field, put the flowers in the gate, in their shed at the gate, have somebody there to take the money, or have a card machine. So they're cutting opportunistically in the hope that people will buy. If you take flowers to market, farmers market, that's how you're doing it. I have a system where I cut to order. So people order their flowers and then I cut them specially. Neither one nor the other is better than the other. It's just a different way of doing things. And it means that you can choose how your business, you can choose how your business runs. Clubbers, here's a tip. You see how this is fully out here. But then it goes on to be quite a long stem. So I'm cutting it off. And I'm going to keep both. One lovely stem, another lovely stem. Waste not, want not. So I'm cutting some of these interesting colours to work with to have a session with the clubbers this afternoon. And I'm going to do a demo for them with using really interesting colours. They've all been sending me really interesting questions, and we'll have a live discussion about colour in floristry, which I'm really looking forward to. I love my club. I'm very, and that's one of the things about your flower farming career, is that you start being a flower farmer, you don't know where it's going to go. Whatever your flower farming, your first year job is, the one thing I can guarantee is that if you're still growing flowers for sale 5 or 10 years down the line, your business model will have changed, because the market will have changed. So you'll evolve with it. Your skills will grow. So you'll evolve with it. You might start growing flowers and might end up being a full-time florist. You might start off growing for wholesale and end up with a really busy shop, retail. You might, like me, start off growing flowers for sale, I started 15 years ago, nobody wanted to buy my flowers. None of the florists wanted to buy my flowers because they were too expensive. And British flowers had a really bad reputation for being floppy and low quality. So they preferred to import their flowers from Holland, which is perfectly reasonable. That's their prerogative. Nobody has to buy your flowers. 15 years later, and people are understanding the ecological cost of flowers being flown around the world. And so there's a much greater interest in locally grown flowers. So my market has expanded, as has all of your markets around the world. So there is a market. If you're thinking about flower farming, yeah, there is definitely a market, but it's a much more competitive market than it was. I used to be the only person in this area growing flowers for sale. And now I can tell you 5 other people within about a 15-mile radius. That is not a bad thing. It's very good for all of us. These people are my colleagues. They're not competition because our businesses are all different. Anyway, back to how I got into flower farming. I know, I digress. Just one more thing on the colour thing. You know, I was saying about how weddings often, you know, they're pink and white or yellow and white or blue and white. And so my challenge is to not only keep it interesting for the customers so that they gasp at the beauty when I deliver them, but also keep it interesting for me. By working closely with colour and really understanding colour, I can add colours into a pink and white wedding that the customer doesn't necessarily see. They're expecting pink and white, so they look for pink and white and they see pink and white. The single yellow buttercup, which lifts the whole thing from being quite flat. Pink and white is quite flat and quite boring. A little lick of yellow transforms quite a flat, boring scheme into an ice cream shop. It lifts it. There's a great deal of joy in just a lick of yellow or a lick of orange. I send you all to Dour Wallpaper, hand-painted wallpaper, where you will see very beautiful wallpaper. And if you identify what it is that makes that wallpaper really beautiful, it may be a lick of orange on the back of a leaf. Right, the UPS man's here. I've got to go and see what he wants. So no, I didn't just leave college and become a flower farmer. As I said, I was in my early 40s, and I left college when I was 20. So what happened next? Well, I went to London and worked for a magazine publisher, a company called Capital Publishing, and it was the late 80s, early 90s, and suddenly we went into this massive recession, and so the company I was working for went bust, and I found myself wondering what to do with myself. So my friend Alex Woods and I went to Paris because we were allowed to. I have to say, I think my whole career has been a great deal about being allowed to. Back in the day, when we in the UK were members of the European Union, young people, or anyone who liked to, could drive to Paris on a sunny afternoon and get a job. And I had done French A-level, so my French was appalling. I had no idea how appalling it was, but I had done all that theatre, so I was confident and I was used to stepping outside my comfort zone. And there was a huge recession in London, in England, so I had to do something. So we drove to Paris. And after various mishaps, I ended up working for American Vogue, and which was the gift, really a huge moment for me, because I worked for an extraordinary woman called Miss Susan Train, and I recommend any of you look her up. There's a wonderful article that was written on her 80th birthday by Joan Juliet Buck, which I think is available online. She was an extraordinary woman. She went to Paris after the war with her friend Bettina McNulty, who I got to know very well. And she and Bettina were young women in Paris after the war. They were so young that they had milk vouchers, and they used to go to the dairy. There was a dairy in the 7th arrondissement, and they would go in the morning with their little can and fill it with milk. Anyway, Susan was one of those people that if you're very lucky in life, I really recommend you, if you're a young person, watch out for these people. There will be grown-ups that you come across who you can make very, very good friends with, who become like a godparent that you have chosen. So they're not a family member that you can't choose, who are just there. They are somebody that you spot, and hopefully they spot you, and they are kind enough to share their wisdom and experience with you. So Susan Train taught me to make lists. She taught me to be incredibly efficient. She taught me that I could do anything I wanted to do, so long as I worked hard at it. She told me that there was no such thing as a free lunch. There is always a cost. But if you know what that cost is, you can take advantage of every opportunity that comes your way. It was the gift of my life that I met Susan Train, and I think of her nearly every day. And she taught me to do everything as well as I possibly could. Don't be slapdash. Don't do something because you can't be bothered not to. Bother about everything. And the nice thing about flower farming is it is all about bothering. You choose, you have to make choices all the time. You never just do randomly things. Everything is a choice. For example, I am right now choosing to cut the off-centre weird curly-whirly stems of my Viburnum opulus. I have sold every single stem of this for next week. It's being cut on Monday for delivery for an event next week. But I know that the people I've sold them to want the straight stems. So they'll have these lovely straight stems and I'll have the curly-whirly bits. Thank you for my work today. Makes it more interesting for me, it's more creative. So I worked at American Vogue, and the other person who came into my life then was a man called Andre Leon Talley. So Susan sadly is long gone after an extraordinary life. She was a Légion d'honneur. She was on the committee of people who at the International Wool Secretariat who gave the prizes to Yves Saint Laurent and Karl Lagerfeld when they broke onto the scene. And she was like an adopted godmother to me. I was very, very lucky to come across her. She taught me about refined living. She taught that you didn't have to... Gracious living is not about being rich. It's about taking time to make things attractive. And it is always worth doing that. And then Andre Talley, another man you can look up, extraordinary fellow. He was very, very tall, enormous character, huge voice. He would come into the office and sort of rah. He would send faxes. We used to get faxes. And in the morning, the first person to the office was always me because I wake up early and I like to get on. So I would get into the office early and he would have been in New York. And there would be these reams of paper coming out of the fax machine with Andre's huge handwriting scrawled across the pages. Do this, call so-and-so, get the hat from Rifat Ozbek. Okay, who am I to argue? And he was very kind to, I was, an underling. And he was very kind to all of us underlings. And when he did trips, I remember one time he went to, in Italy, there's a town where a lot of the designers have their manufacturing bases called ahem. I don't know how to pronounce it, AEFFE. And whenever he went there, he would come back with something for me. It was very nice of him. I had a Prada, like a basket, a string bag. Not the, fancy pants handbag, but a string bag from Prada. And an Alberta Ferretti sundress, which I loved and I wore more and more. And a really great patchwork Moschino tweed skirt, which I wore more and more and more. Anyway, he was very kind. And he said, what we do doesn't matter. Fashion, of course fashion matters, but, compared to war or growing food. So fashion doesn't matter, but we may as well do it to the best of our ability. And he said this as my friend Alana Lasso, who is still a friend and is life coaching and career coaching in Paris. Hi, Alana. And I were kneeling on the floor, stuffing the arms of a hand-painted silk chiffon Dior dress, couture dress. We stuffing the arms gently with tissue paper. And this one dress took a whole enormous box to send it to America for a shoot. So he taught me to take pride in doing even the smallest, most mundane things. Nothing is small enough to not do well. And that was a real lesson. I had enormous admiration for him. And I'm sad he's gone. He and Susan are no longer with us, but their lessons remain. Anyway, so Vogue was a great place. I learned packaging. I learned to pack well. I learned to make really efficient lists. I learned to step out of my comfort zone at all times. I remember ringing up Lionel at the press office of Jean-Paul Gaultier in my execrable French. But my French got better until one day I drove to work one day. I had a little car and I was driving over the bridge from the Ile de la Cité onto the left bank. And I used to listen to the French radio in the morning in the car, and they had our horoscopes every day. And I used to listen to the horoscope and not really understand it. And I remember the first day I understood my horoscope on the French radio. That was a big day. So I was pushing myself out of my comfort zone all the time. It was a really, really fantastic time. But I'm not a fashion-y type. So I wasn't going to stay in fashion forever. But it was great fun in my 20s to be in Paris. So I left Vogue, I went to John Galliano. Was very, very bad at helping run his business. Appalling. I worked incredibly hard for a year. And then I thought, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to write books. So we get onto books. Just back to colour for a second. I think this is something that came from my years at Vogue. And working with Susan and Andre and everybody, was I learned to see the detail. So when I talked about the Dour wallpaper before, I didn't know what Dour wallpaper was before I worked for Vogue, but I was sufficiently interested that when I saw the shop in London, I had a good look and was inspired. And here are the details that you might find in a Dour wallpaper in a real life branch of lime leaf. So this is just coming into leaf, and look at that incredible colour. But it's not just that zingy green. Look at the pink. Look at the pink. And the pink is what gives the green interest. So look. That pink is absolutely astonishing. And that is what makes a lime leaf useful and interesting in floristry. And so that's what Vogue did. It taught me to look for the lick of pink or the lick of orange. Yes, Vogue taught me not to do what you were told was normal, but to see something and wonder if you could do something interesting with it. Which is how I've learned, for example, that cow parsley makes a wonderful cut flower, that willow makes a wonderful wreath base, that forget-me-nots have long enough stems to cut. Yes, I think I liked flower farming because there wasn't particularly a model for me to copy. I didn't even know what the term business model meant, if I'm honest. But there was because of the way that there hadn't been really very many artisan flower farmers in the UK when I started. I mean, there was Rachel Siegfried at Green and Gorgeous, Sel Robertson at Forever Green Flowers in Norfolk. But there was Clowance in Cornwall. But there weren't really that many small artisan flower farmers. So I could create something without feeling as though I was doing it wrong, or without people telling me I was doing it wrong. So how did I become a flower farmer? Well, when I stopped working for John Galliano, I decided I was going to write novels. I was going to do what I'd always wanted to do. And I had worked incredibly hard for John. It was a very immersive experience. So I was paid quite well, but had no time to spend any of the money. So I had pretty much a year's worth of money in the bank. So I thought, I'll give myself a year, write a book, and who knows, have a go. My life had been one in which, until then, I'd been very lucky. Every time I had a go at something, it worked. I drove to Paris, got a job, it worked. My experience was, have a go. So I had a go, and I was very lucky. A friend of mine introduced me to an agent who sold my first book. I got a 2-book deal for the eye-watering amount of about 10,000 quid, I think. This was in 1998. Quite a lot of money. But it was English money. So I moved back to England from Paris because the exchange rate wasn't brilliant, and that 10,000 quid went further in England than it did in Paris. So I moved back to England, wrote these 2 books, and because my experience was that you just had a go and it worked, I didn't pay enough attention. I wrote the books, published them, and as with often with authors, young people having a go, I kind of assumed that being published was the end, was the objective achieved. I hadn't really thought about cash flow. And so they did okay, but they didn't make enough to live on. And that's how I ended up. I then fell into jobbing writing, doing things like copywriting for catalogues or developing television programs or ghostwriting books or whatever. And that was all fine. That was all great. Then I got married, moved to Somerset, ended up here at Common Farm and thought, oh my goodness, I have overreached myself. I cannot afford to pay the monthly bills. I can't afford to live here. How are we going to do this? Still flying by the seat of my pants, but remembering that economic imperative of being paid to weed by the yard by my mother, the child of parents who'd never worked for anyone else either much. I mean, my father did when he first started out, but soon ended up working for himself. My mother had taught me, only last weekend, we were talking about how she used to say, never have a boss. So I started flower farming, growing flowers for sale, and I'm very, very lucky that I sold enough of them despite the fact I knew nothing about what I was doing. I sold enough through the no babysitting years that I could learn on the job. And it is flower farming that has taught me that the more that you learn about a process, the more you stop and consider a process, the more you strategize a process, the more you think about why you're doing it, what you're doing it for, the more likely you are to have a success at it. And so that's how my flower farming business has really become not just a business where I grow flowers for sale, but also a teaching business. And I teach flower farming, but I also teach lifestyle running a lifestyle business, because there wasn't a model when I started. And I think a lot of people look at what people like me do on Instagram or YouTube or wherever and think it looks lovely, but they don't know how to start. And so I think it is my privilege, really my privilege, to help people identify their objectives and work a way through so that they too can run a creative business, something which doesn't necessarily have a model that they can copy, something where they have to use their noodle all the time. I am infinitely cleverer than I was when I started flower farming. Infinitely. Your brain is a muscle, and it the more you exercise it, the bigger it gets, the better it gets. So my brain has been much more because the books are still there in my head. I have spent the winter rewriting The Flower Farmer's Year. Thank you very much, Bloomsbury, for the commission. And this morning, I finished the first draft. It needs a lot of work, but I've done my first draft. And what that's reminded me is that whatever job you choose to do, the brain power that goes into it is a muscle. And the more you practice, the better you get at it. But I've also had a really lovely time this winter. I've been reading and reading and reading. I had forgotten. Last autumn, I was bored. I'm honest, I was really bored. I was like, I've done this for a long time. I'm good at it. It pays a good enough living, but I'm bored. So I went and did a personal development day with my friend Alice Armstrong Scales. And I came away from that remembering that really my first love, before gardening, before Paris, before running a business, before anything else, my first love is books. And so, watch this space. But I have to remember to give myself permission to do it. And I have to dare. Use the same courage that I used to start a flower farm. I have to say, I think the reason I started a flower farm with just like that was because I wasn't frightened of it. I wasn't as frightened of it as I am about writing. And the reason I'm frightened of writing is because I'm in awe of it, because I love it so much. I love books so much. Bad books, good books, eye-watering books, transporting books, interesting books, factual books, fiction books. I love books. I love reading more than anything else, And the way that one can get lost in writing in the same way that one can get lost reading is extraordinary. I think I get lost in the same way when I'm doing floristry. But it's physically very hard work, floristry. Anyway, we'll see. Maybe time for a change. But that's my story of how I got into flower farming. I kind of fell into it. And my neighbour sent me a bunch of flowers in the post. I was already growing too many sweet peas. I didn't want to keep pigs, sheep or chickens anymore. And I thought, I can do that. And I did it. And along the way, I've learned to run a business. And I've learned to learn as well as to teach. And that's why it's been a very good thing. Anyway, that's how I got into flower farming. Good luck with your journey. Do share your dreams in the comments. If there is something that you would really love to do, but you're nervous about, or you don't know where to start, or you need confidence, put a comment in the comments here, because it won't just be me replying. Everybody replies to everybody's comments. This is beginning to be a really friendly community where people are very supportive of one another. Take your lucky breaks. Keep an eye out for your lucky breaks. I had a really lovely chat the other day with, I was in London for the Royal Geographical Society, being trained to be a judge of the floristry at the Chelsea Flower Show. Yes, I know, very good. And I was talking to somebody there, and the subject of Susan Train came up, and I was saying how she really became my mentor. And the person I was talking to said, how fantastic. And then she launched you. And I said, no, she didn't launch me. But what she did was give me the confidence that I could launch myself. And if you can find somebody like that in life, then that is your great good fortune. Anyway, happy flower farming, everybody. I better go and do all that floristry. Now I've cut all those flowers, I better get on. But have a lovely day. Do put comments. I answer all the comments on my YouTube. And I hope you've enjoyed the clip. I fear it might be quite long, but anyway, enjoy. Bye.